Good evening. Welcome to the Burnsville Economic Development Commission meeting. It's July 12th, 2017. First order of business is adoption of the agenda.
I would like to move to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
Sandra, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Great. Moving on, adoption of the minutes from the May 10th, 2017 meeting.
I'll move to adopt.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Election of the officers.
I don't remember how we did this.
Somebody's got a
Do we have
nomination
to
in.
nominate people?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair, you should take nominations for both positions separately
Okay.
and vote on them separately.
Chair first, or does it matter?
It does not matter.
All right, let's start with chair.
I'll nominate Meet Shaw.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that awkward silence there. All opposed? All right, I guess I'll continue this. And for vice chair? Chris, I think you should do it, but I don't know if, can I? In this case, yes.
Are you interested?
Yeah, I'll take it.
I'll nominate Chris John.
Second? Brady? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Great. Moving on, review of retail trends, issues, and repositioning ideas.
Mr. Chair, when we did the Economic Development Commission's work plan back in January, one of the items that the commission wished to have added to their work plan was a presentation on retail trends, retail issues, and repositioning. About a month ago, in preparation for this meeting, I contacted the Minnesota Shopping Center Association and asked for a referral of an expert. And I was told that tonight's speaker, Mr. McComb, president of the McComb Group, was one of the most knowledgeable people of the retail industry in the Twin Cities market. So I am very happy to say that Jim has graciously given of his time to come and address us and give us some ideas about what's going on in retail. And with that, I will turn it all over to Jim for his presentation.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the opportunity to put together this presentation tonight because it forced me to think a bit, and I've been paying a lot of attention to retail recently. Everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Some background. I went to work for Dayton Corporation in 1968. Was there for about 6 years and started my consulting business. So I've had the opportunity to look at retail and its growth over a long period of time. And this enabled me to think back about the changes we're seeing today and what's causing them. And I hope this doesn't turn out to be like Skip asking me to come and talk about retail and I tell you how the watch works rather than what time it is. But the Minneapolis Tribune did me a favor this weekend by printing this photograph of Nicollet Avenue in 1960. And what we're talking about tonight is change. And change is always occurring. It just sometimes sneaks up on you. But what struck me about this photo, and I remember this block and these stores, but Kresge's, Burt's Fine Shoes, W.T. Grant, Baker Shoes, Three Sisters, and Juster's, all are no longer in existence. But these stores had survived the Depression and World War II, but they couldn't survive the baby boom. And we're seeing some of that now in retailing. So the winds of change, we'll talk about e-commerce, the retail industry, the demographic shifts, and the economic impacts that are driving this change. First of all, e-commerce is being blamed for a lot. It's certainly an impact, but there are a lot of other things going on other than e-commerce. Amazon is the largest internet retailer in the world. Walmart is the second largest internet retailer in the United States. So this internet sales is both store-based and pure play-based. We're seeing trends where the internet retailers, the clicks, are now opening brick and mortar stores. Amazon, Bonobos, and several others are now opening internet stores or brick and mortar stores to reinforce their store sales. And we've got the brick and mortar retailers expanding their internet operations and being very creative about it. And they call it the logistics category, because I couldn't think of anything else to title this. But if you followed this at all, you're probably aware of the shrinking delivery time for internet purchases, to where if you're a subscriber to Prime Fresh from Amazon, you can get grocery and beer items and others in 2 hours. So I have this vision of somebody sitting in their living room or rec room watching a football game and realizing they're running short on beer. And dialing up Amazon and having a little beer delivered from, and they could get it within 2 hours. This is a totally, I think, is a game changer in many ways for the industry. But the brick and mortar retailers have an advantage where they can have sales picked up at the store or returns made to the store. The interesting thing about that phenomena is that somebody that picks up at the store, 40% of them make a purchase in the store at the same time. And if they're returning something, roughly 90% make a purchase on the trip when they're returning something to the store. So in a sense, the internet relationship for the brick and mortar store is driving trips to their store and helping their sales. And you would not believe this, but Home Depot gets 5% of their sales off their internet website, which I think you would not think of a home center as being somebody that would be doing a big internet business. Internet sales represent about 5% of total retail sales. It varies from store to store, industry to industry. So it's a relatively small component. And if we look at internet sales by source, Amazon is 50.8 billion, which includes not only their sales, but all of the people that sell through their site. Other pure play retailers are 100 billion. The omnichannel, or the retail stores, represent 77 billion. So the brick and mortar stores represent about 35% of total internet retail sales.
What is pure play? What is Pure Play?
That's the brick and mortar. Oh, the Pure Play, those are just the internet retailers. They don't have a brick and mortar presence.
So all others besides Amazon?
It includes Amazon and all of the others.
Okay.
Looking at the retail industry, people have always asked me, is the retail industry overstored? And my response is yes and no. It's overstored with buildings and stores that retailers don't want. It's understored with retail stores that retailers do want. That's why we continue to see increased construction of retail space in this overstored environment. And the problem is that by and large, the obsolete space doesn't disappear. It just sits there looking for a tenant. And all of this surplus space helps to pull down rental rates for real estate. New retail concepts generally need new or different space, so they can't always adapt to an existing store that's vacant. One of the real trends is the fast fashion. H&M is an example of a fast fashion store, and you have one at Burnsville Mall. I was out at the mall tonight before the meeting and visited the H&M store. They typically turn or freshen their merchandise assortments on a weekly basis and can respond to changes in trends very quickly. They have fabulous price points, so they're becoming the combination of the fast fashion, fresh merchandise, and great value makes them a real competitor in today's market. Zara, a fashion chain from Spain, can take a retail concept from design to store shelf in 21 days, which is phenomenal. And when you think of the department stores, they work on a system where it takes them 6 months to figure out what they're ordering, order it, source it, and get it onto the shelf. That doesn't work in today's market anymore. We'll get into this in more depth, but outdated merchandise, that's part of the fast fashion, that the department store merchandise is out of trend before it gets on the shelf. And today's consumer, particularly the millennial, is looking for a different type of merchandise than the boomer. And most of our mall stores are predicated, they grew up with the boomer in generation merchandising to that group. And most of the stores have what they call their customer. And sometimes they describe this person in terms of age and demographics and household size and children. And by focusing on that customer, they may be ignoring trends that are going on, and their customer is one growing older, and there's a new customer coming up that isn't the same person as they're trying to sell to. And so that's affecting the sales of these companies. A significant factor, I think, is bad management and bad merchandising decisions. I'll use Sears and Kmart as the poster child for that phenomena. And Sears was the Amazon of the 19th century with its catalog. And it's been interesting to watch over the years, as Shears shrank their business and has come to the point where they have now stated there's a question as whether they can remain a viable corporation. And they've lost $8 billion in the last 4 years. I mean, these are government numbers, these aren't store numbers. So it's just phenomenal. And as I look at the stores that are closing, a large number of them have been through a leveraged buyout by private equity and Wall Street. What happens with a leveraged buyout? And as part of the phenomena you may have read about capturing value from real estate and retail companies. Well, they buy the company with a lot of debt. Then they add more debt as much as they can get the investment community to give them. Then they declare themselves a dividend paid out of the debt they raised, pat themselves on the back for being savvy investors. But they take away the margin that a business needs to survive a difficult period of time. So the typical route for the store that is a victim of a leveraged buyout is increase the debt, declare the dividend, sell the company to the public if you can, and then when the business hits a hiccup, they could declare bankruptcy to get rid of the debt. And this is being repeated across the industry. I was looking at the numbers on Neiman Marcus, and their debt equals $92 million per store. I can't even fathom how they can pay back $92 million per store in this retail environment.
Jim, were you going to comment on the difference of the space demands?
Pardon?
Are you going to comment on the differences of what the retail environment is looking for in space? That was one of your observations. Why is there obsolete space, and what is the new space they're looking for?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
All right, your previous slide said there's obsolete space.
Yeah.
What makes it obsolete, and what is it that they are looking for in space?
Size, location,
So is it too big or too small?
it could be too big, too small, could have too low a ceiling. That may be by and large, most of the Kmart stores are obsolete based on their age and
They're just
location.
tired. Okay.
And there's, well, it's a simple, convenience stores, gas stations. And there's been a tremendous change in the petroleum industry, so there are fewer gas stations, service stations that can be supported in the market. They go dark and they sit vacant. Now, because of the demand for small retail spaces for services and quick-serve restaurants, investors or developers are buying the gas stations, putting up a 10 to 15,000 square foot convenience strip center and recycling that real estate. There needs to be more of that with other types of real estate. Expanding retail categories. This is an interesting list because we have the expanding and we have the shrinking categories. Non-store retailers, that's internet, so they're up 8% growth rate over the 2007-14 period. Used merchandise, that's Goodwill and consignment stores, 5.9%. Dollar stores, 5.8%. Computer and software, that's Apple. Warehouse clubs and superstores, Costco, Target Superstore, Sam's Club. Limited service restaurants are growing, full-service restaurants are shrinking, drugstores, supermarkets. These are all areas that are difficult to make significant inroads with the internet. If we look at the shrinking categories, bookstores, office supplies, department stores, discount stores are actually shrinking in sales because they're being replaced by superstores. So that's sort of a different phenomena. Radio, TV, and electronics, furniture, and home furnishings, which is a result of the lower housing development that's occurring. And in department stores, about 80% of the merchandise in a department store is apparel, men's, women's, and cosmetics. Now, cosmetics is a bright spot in the retail environment because the millennials are into cosmetics in a big way, so they always look good for a selfie. Store categories, this is generally the general merchandise stores, Macy's, Penny's, Gordon, Sears, Kmart. I've asterisked those that are related to bankruptcy. The general apparel, those are generally stores that sell to boomers, which is in the retail environment. We talk about trend in terms of post-peak, peak, pre-peak, incoming or outgoing. The boomer consumer is post-peak and outgoing, just as the evolution of age. As consumers get older, they spend less on things, particularly apparel. So that's causing a lot of these stores to shrink back and fail. But Limited is an example that the shopping industry development, the regional malls, coincided with the boomer entering the workforce and becoming a consumer. And your typical family spending peaks at about the age 55 and then starts to decline. So as the boomer is reaching and passing over age 55, their sales start to decline, and these stores are suffering from that phenomena. And they don't have the ability, it appears, to shift their merchandise to the incoming consumer, which is the millennial. And this is the phenomena that's going on within retailing. So you look at the teen junior apparel category, significant cutback in retail stores because today's teens and juniors don't buy what they sell because their business is predicated on selling to young boomers, and they've lost their way in the marketplace. Sporting goods, today much more activity on with media and computer driven, so people are doing less exercise. I've read in the paper the Minneapolis Park Board has trouble keeping softball teams, and they're actually trying to figure out if they can create softball leagues with teams with 9 players. And then the children's category is shrinking because of the reduced birth rate.
Your yellow asterisk that it says bankruptcy, does that mean they're in bankruptcy or they're have survived it, or what status are they in?
They're in bankruptcy.
They're in. Okay.
There are some that have talked about entering bankruptcy and figured out how not to. Store closings, again, we've got the sporting goods, the children's. Expanding grocery, we've got Aldi, Hy-Vee, Fresh Time Farmers Market, Trader Joe's expanding in this market. Athleisure, that's basically athletic exercise type appeal. That's a whole new category that appeals to the millennials. And then the other category is off-price, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Ross Dress for Less. Ross is not in our market, but they're all opening stores. The quick service restaurants, Chick-fil-A, Naf, Shack, all are expanding in our market. Dave & Buster's, Punch Bowl, Social is the entertainment concepts. And then specialty fitness. And there's a host of others as we look at retail areas. We see a wide variety of small service-oriented establishments expanding in our market. The demographic shifts, the boomers, millennials, and Generation Z are driving much of this change in retailing. If we look at the age cohorts, the millennials were generally born 1980 to 1999, and in 2015 ranged from 16 to 35 years in age. Coming up behind them is Generation Z, and few of them have entered the workforce yet, but they're influencing retail sales. The baby boomers born 1946 to 64 are now in the early 50s to 69, or if we go to 2017, they're 53 to 71. So they're easing out of the prime spending period. If we look at the numbers in 2015, this is some old data, but millennials 827,000 in the Twin City area, Generation X 600, baby boomers 700,000 and shrinking, while the millennial population is increasing, as well as the Generation Z. This is the first time I've used this data, but it helped me understand what was going on, in that the boomers began to influence retailing in 1958 as 12-year-old teenagers, making comments and offering their opinion on retail purchases. That's 2 years after Southdale opened, to put this in perspective with time frame. The boomers entered the workforce 65 to 1983. The peak spending period was 1981 to 2001, and they began entering retirement at 2008. What's interesting, as the boomer began to peak in the spending, the millennials should have been coming up behind them to supplant their purchasing power. But what happened with millennials, if they, this group 2000 or roughly, 1980 to 2000 was their general birth date. Those that graduated prior to 2008 had a better chance of finding a career job than those that graduated after that period of time. So, and you've all read about the boomers moving into downtown, or the millennials moving into downtown Minneapolis. That represents roughly the top 15 to maybe 20% of the income group of the millennials. So there's a whole host of millennials that are still working jobs that are not very, the pay is not very good. So we've got this problem where the upcoming generation changed its desires for merchandise and has less spending potential than the generations they're replacing. Another significant factor, which since 2000, inflation has increased about 25%. Real income is up about 15%, and that's resulted in reduced purchasing power of about 10% for the average household. And I was at a meeting, and there was a president of a manufacturing company sitting next to me, and we got to talking, and somehow the economy came up, and I mentioned to him that this phenomena of falling real income wages, and he said, well, gee, we haven't increased our salaries in 8 years. And I thought, this is the part of the problem. This is reinforced by this information from the U.S. Census, where we can get information on employees aged 29 or younger, 30 to 54, or 55 and older by industry and weekly wage. So what is shown in yellow here is the industrial categories that are prone to have more younger people in employment. So the age 29 or younger, we see retail trade is 16%, administration and support 6%, accommodation and food services 16%. So the jobs that tend to have the lowest wages have the most young people employed in them, which again is affecting the retail market. This table, the government has been doing this report since 2002, and the most recent data is 2014. But the lower segment is $1,250 per week or less, or $1,250 per month or less. In 2009, that was worth $1,080, and in 2014, it was worth $975. And we see that shrinking for all of the wage categories, and the number of workers in these lower priced jobs are remaining relatively stable in that period. Change dropped from 390 to 357,000. The result of all of this is the consumer has become more frugal, seeking value and spending less than they used to. The retail purchases that they're seeking are changing. Both boomers are spending more on, and millennials are basically spending more on experiences and less on things. And the stores sell things by and large, and they're suffering from that phenomenon. Lifestyle changes, are occurring. The delayed household family formations is a part of this. It's resulted in lower household housing construction, results in lower sales of furniture, home furnishings, appliances, all of those categories. And then we have the lower birth rates that are affecting the toy stores, the children's stores, and those other categories. It's been interesting to look at what's occurring in the boomer category as they work toward retirement, but there are several things that are affecting their ability to spend on goods or services. The change from defined benefit pension plans to IRAs, huge shift in income for retired people. Many boomers have college debt they're paying off for their children because they had to sign on the loans. The children haven't been able to find jobs. The parents have to make the payments. Children living at home creates burdens for the parents. It, in many cases, will prevent them from moving out of their house to a smaller downsized property because they've got the boomerangs in the basement. Some, because of the housing crisis, still have mortgage payments. They have little or no home equity, and there are a host of other factors that are affecting their economic well-being. If we look at the millennials, there's the two subsets that graduated before 2008, more likely to have career employment, more likely to have employer-provided health insurance, more likely to be able to make college loan payments, and more likely to be living independent in rental housing. Now, a lot of the boomers, or the boomer parents, are subsidizing the housing for their children. If we look at the second subset that graduated after 2008, they're less likely to have found career employment, less likely to have employer-provided health care, more likely to have to purchase health insurance or pay the tax, less likely to be able to make their college loan payments, and more likely to be living at home. There's a whole series of spending items that are affected by these groups. And the thing that's, I think, difficult for the subset 2 category, they're delayed getting into a career. That will punish them financially the rest of their life, because they'll be 5, 6, 10 years behind the people that graduate today, because there's sort of a disadvantage from when you go out and look for work and you've been working in part-time jobs, 2 or 3 jobs in service industries. That is viewed as a negative by a future employer. And so we're going to be dealing with this phenomenon as we move forward. Back to the concept of the retail stores and the customer. The boomer was viewed by the marketing industry and the retailers as a fairly homogeneous group of individuals. And now when we get to the millennials and the Generation Z, we have multiple segments of consumers with different choices and lifestyles. And this reduces the number of people to shop at a specific store category, which is why you see this, the closing of stores. The sales potential within the individual trade area for that shopping center or store has shrunk. And unless they've got a very large trade area, they don't have enough customers to purchase their merchandise. These segments have needs and desires that are different. The boomers tended to want to all have the same things. And when we get to the millennials, they have a different value set and lifestyle. They tend to value quality over quantity, prefer something unique or custom, discerning, tech-savvy, demanding consumers, favor authenticity and personalization, and prefer products that reflect their personal lifestyle and viewpoint. And one of the articles used an example of millennial who was obviously well paid, because he was in a category where he could afford to spend $10,000 to $12,000 for a watch. But he wasn't interested in buying the typical Rolex, which was a I've made it type watch. He was buying a pricey watch that reflected his interest in doing triathlons. So he was buying an expensive watch that related to his lifestyle, not trying to impress somebody with the fact that he had made it. And that's part of what's occurring. So as a result, the millennials and the Generation Z that will follow tend to avoid the stores that based on a boomer merchandise strategy, which is a lot of our stores, and instead are shopping at unique stores with compelling merchandise. And I see these stores opening in the metropolitan area on a regular basis. They're one-of stores, they're not chains, they don't have a AAA credit rating, and their income structure is not designed to pay mall rents. The mall owner is looking for a good credit, a chain, and they don't have a high interest in renting space to a single store, unproven track record, even though they may be a good merchant. And we're blessed in the Twin City area because of the Target and the Dayton Hudson heritage. We have a lot of creative merchants that live in our community. And when you see a new retail store, it is generally created by one of those former Target or Dayton Hudson merchants. Well, that's pretty much the presentation. You may have some questions. Hope this has been helpful.
Any
So-
question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, so Mr. McCombs, I've admired your work for years. You are well-known in the commercial real estate world, and you've done a lot of work over the years. And so I have great respect for your perspective over the years and the things you've done, so thank you for being here tonight. I want to go back to Commissioner Kuplick's question to you earlier about some of the reuse of these retail stores and so forth. And so I'm thinking in particular the regional malls that are probably being hit the hardest of all retailers because they're anchored by big box retailers. And so we're seeing a lot of new uses for that vacant space. that we haven't seen before and that are definitely out of the box, perhaps. For instance, Lifetime Fitness' recent announcement of building the biggest and the best Lifetime Fitness yet in the former JCPenney's location at Southdale Mall. And so I don't know that I would have certainly have ever seen that, and I'm in the commercial real estate world. So I'm kind of curious, as you think about the vacancies, what do you see happening with a lot of these vacancies and what is the answer for a lot of these regional malls?
Well, first of all, you have to start with what type of mall is it? Is it an A, B mall or a C and a D? The key to the regional mall business has always been the anchor store that through its advertising and their brand power drew the customer to the mall to shop at the smaller stores. And they got fabulous deals when malls were opened because of that brand power, you know. Out at Mall of America, Nordstrom, Macy, and Bloomingdale's each got more than $30 million from the developer to build their store. And so if you have a mall that starts to lose its anchors, that's a huge challenge. And most of the malls in America were built with 4 or 5 anchor stores. Typically, it would be Sears, Penney's, 2 local department stores like we had Donaldson's and Dayton's, and possibly in an upscale mall, they'd have a fashion department store, Bloomingdale's or Neiman Marcus. So as you look at Sears closing stores, Penney's closing stores, and we only have one department store company now because Macy's became the repository for all of the stores that were the regional department stores like Dayton's and Donaldson's. And so with those 3 companies closing stores, those malls are history. They will go the route of Brookdale. And then if we look at Southdale, which I'm well familiar with because it's been a client of ours over the years, Southdale expanded too large when they expanded in 1990. But they were sort of forced into that because they built a new store for Dayton's and they converted the Dayton store, which was 3 levels, into retail space. They should have never developed the 3rd level because it's never done well. The Penney's end of the mall has always been a difficult because it was added in sort of an inconvenient way. So, but Penney's is an example of an obsolete space that is going to be demolished and rebuilt as a Lifetime Fitness. And that's a good move on the part of the mall owner. Now, there's an interesting phenomena there that retail stores used to object to having a physical fitness facility on their parcel, as the documents would prevent having a Lifetime Fitness on the property with a department store or with even a Target store, because they feared the parking generation created by the fitness facility, which has huge peaks in parking. Now you find, because the reality is that department stores don't exist anymore to fill vacant spaces, the retailers and the mall owners are changing their attitudes and say, well, there's a lot of people that come to a Lifetime Fitness. We should have those in the mall rather than across the street. So there's some attitude shifting that has to change, and it's going to result in having to change the documents for the shopping centers. I think CBL with Burnsville is proactive. They recovered the Mervyn space, and re-tenanted with Dick's and other stores. I suspect they're the buyer for the Sears store, because I'll pass this around, but this are 2 pages from a Seritage Properties report that has 240 stores that they were looking to lease space in. And so if I've got this, CBL has it. But this is a list of 240-some stores that Sears wants to sell or reposition. And as you look at it, you'll see that they had a concept for splitting the current Sears store into a Sears store and tenant spaces. No mall owner would want that to happen. They would rather recover the space and gain control of it, and then lease it to tenants that support what they're trying to accomplish rather than what Sears is trying to accomplish. And I think most people in the industry believe that Sears will be filing bankruptcy at some point in the future. Through the bankruptcy process, their stores will go to wherever, and the mall owner wants to control that space and redevelop it. I think the mall owners have to revise their rent expectations, and they have to take more risks on unproven tenants, going with good merchants rather than a poorly merchandised national chain that's going to fail. There was an interesting balancing point here in terms of how they deal with their properties. There'll be some challenges. My suggestion, thinking about this, you should think about reaching out to CBL and see if you can help them deal with this challenging period of time and help them create value on their property. They've got some challenging issues ahead of them.
Jim, as I've been looking at the presentation, I was just wondering, is there an access issue at these properties for consumers? I'm just wondering, because it sounds like the millennials would like to drive to the smaller boutique shops, but possibly they're utilizing the internet anyway. Is it because these stores are difficult to get to? Do they not like parking at the mall and walking in and trying to find the retailer from there? Or, because it seems like the strip centers were more popular now.
Well, the research that I've seen on this says that the millennials like to shop in stores. The stores aren't offering them what they want to buy. And you look at the department stores, or Macy's, for example, with all of their apparel, because they had uninspired merchandise. They chose the route of marking it down. Well, making it cheaper didn't make it more attractive to the millennial, because they were looking for something that Macy's wasn't selling. And that's the challenge. And I read a Macy merchandiser was commenting on their stories, Vice President of Merchandising. He says, does the consumer really need 65 brands of polo shirts? And I think the obvious answer to that is no. You can get by with fewer than 65 brands of polo shirts. So the department stores and these stores that are exclusive have got a real challenge to sort out who they want their customer to be and what they're gonna sell to them. But that's the job of the merchant. When I watch Saks struggle in downtown Minneapolis, I always said, Saks sold in their stores in New York merchandise that would sell in Minneapolis. They didn't put that merchandise in the Minneapolis store, so it didn't sell. And the job of a merchant is to figure out how to sell what people want to buy. So that they can't solve that problem, they don't have a business. And I can remember going through the Saks store and seeing, I was looking at a rack of dresses, 2s and 14s. In our marketplace, there aren't a lot of 2s, there are more 14s, but there's a lot of people in between that. And they couldn't shop at Saks because Saks didn't put the sizes on the rack that the customer would buy. And so big sophisticated companies can make large mistakes.
Now, you talked about helping out the mall owners. What ways can we do that? What ideas would be able to draw people into the malls again? Or, as you say, is it going to be obsolete 10 years from down the road?
I think I look at what I see happening in retail spending patterns and with retail stores, and I consider any business that sells at retail a retail store. So retail stores, so that there's a host of service businesses, medical, physical, fitness, food, and those are the businesses that are expanding. Those, and they're selling to the customer that this is driven by the millennial customer. They need to invite those stores into the mall. They need to rethink what their business is. And I came to this conclusion about 25, 30 years ago, doing tenant mixes on shopping centers in neighborhoods. And what I was seeing is that there were roughly half to 45% retail stores and 50 to 55% services. My clients, the shopping center owners, says, I own a shopping center. Shopping centers are retail. Well, there's a lot of retail tenants out there that aren't stores, but are services that could be. And generally, the services can pay more rent than the retail stores. So they need to think about and reinvent their business to compete and be able to attract this new customer.
So if I'm following you right, if you have a service industry in the mall, it would pull more people in, and then the retail stores would do better. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Use an example. There's a host of massage salons, nail salons, fitness strategies. And they can support more of those businesses than they have, and they're void in many of these. They probably have lease restrictions that Avita says you can't have another salon like us, but they probably should have another salon like that. So these are some of the challenges you run into. And the other thing I've seen about hair salons. The stylist patrons tend to be extremely loyal. And I'll use my wife as an example. Over the 30 years that we've been married, she's had the same hairdresser and has followed her from salon to salon to salon. And now drives, even with all the highway construction, from Minneapolis out to Blaine to get her hair done once a month by her favorite stylist. And man, when you can get that kind of loyalty built into your property so that the customer, in this example, my wife, knows she's going to a salon and she needs something, she can get it at a store in the mall, that pins down a transaction for the mall that wouldn't occur otherwise. So they need to rethink their business across the whole consumer spectrum.
Skip, outside of the Burnsville Center, how have our retail strip centers been doing? As far as, do we have any idea what vacancy looks like in that area or no?
Commissioner, most of our small strip centers actually have very limited vacancy. And I think the point that Mr. McComb made earlier, if you look at a lot of our small strip centers, they have integrated the service businesses. Many of them have integrated an office-type business. For example, this morning, our chamber had their coffee break at Farmers Insurance, which is in one of our small strip centers, sitting next to a tattoo parlor, and at the opposite end is Domino's Pizza. I mean, they have a very diverse mix in that small strip center, and they had one bay that was vacant on the Nicollet side. If you go to the back side of that mall, the strip center, they have a lot of vacancy, but there's no exposure there. So outside of a couple of our smaller strip centers, our vacancy is relatively small. And interestingly enough, one of our smaller strip centers that have the most vacancies tend to be the ones that were right by the Burnsville Center, and they grew up there to eat off of the traffic of the Burnsville Center, and they have had a tendency to have the tenants similar to the Burnsville Center. So they're following the mall model versus the small strip center model, and they're showing the same higher vacancy as the Burnsville Center is.
Do you see, one question I have is life cycle. The life cycle of a business entity, namely a large regional mall, okay? So it's about 30 years into its life cycle, okay? They started, and now we're in the twilight of them because they attracted, the four anchors, and then they're kind of crumbling. So what do? Is it that you simply go, well, we won't do anything like that? Or is it, do we want to repurpose the space? And are other cities repurposing the space, namely adopting this more eclectic group of business owners?
It's happening. If you, the project over in Egan Commons, it's a good example. It's got Hy-Vee, it's got Total Wine, Sierra Trading, which is a new store to our market, TJ Maxx, Home Goods, and a mix of smaller stores on their little Main Street area. But they are capitalizing on these trends. The challenge for and I think the businesses have life cycles. Department stores have always tended to have very long life cycles because they were able to reinvent themselves. Whether they will reinvent themselves this time, because things may be moving too fast. And I was thinking about this, there was a president of Target that took over from Ken Mackey. He coined the phrase, speed is life. Well, unfortunately, Target, under his guidance, became a bureaucracy-laden organization where they no longer had speed. It took them too long to make decisions, and he was replaced by another gentleman. So I think the answer to the question is it boils down to management, both the mall management and the store management. And the mall needs to be able to think about where they want their mall to be 10 years from now, and how do they attract the tenants that will make it possible for them to get to the end of the 10-year period without significant financial damage. The mall is just space. It's the key is to who they put in the space, and do they have the ability to sort it out.
Are some malls too old? What I mean by that, it is space. My question is, the four walls and the brick and mortar, are some of them just too old that they can't be repurposed, they need to be bulldozed and start over?
Well, if we use Sears stores, there are probably 50 Sears stores around the nation that have been acquired by shopping center owners and repurposed with smaller stores like happened here at Burnsville with Sears at Eden Prairie is going to become a Shields. Sears in Rochester became a Shields. There are tenants to fill these stores, but sometimes you have to find a way to break them into smaller spaces. Over the years, I've seen shopping centers that have lost anchor stores. And typically you can see the one floor is given to one tenant, two tenants are into three spaces. They put a larger tenant against the back wall and fill in with inline spaces, extending the mall corridor. There are a number of ways to do this. The challenge is, what's the size of the trade area? How desirable is the mall? And can they find the resources to tenant the space? And now, in my view, accept lower rents than they were used to seeing in their pro formas. I don't see any solution that says they're going to take a space that goes dark today and lease it for more money than the current tenant was paid. I think that will be an unusual circumstance going forward.
Yeah, they're in a rock and a hard place then. Because a lot of these places are in a rock and a hard place because they can't afford, their pro formas simply won't afford they can't get bank financing at a much lower rent structure and do a complete rehab. That's,
Most of the regional malls are in REITs, and they have the flexibility to accept lower rents, whether they want to or not, but some rent is better than no rent. All real estate owners come to that conclusion at some point.
What about the phenomenon with Amazon, the online, as you call them, click retailers? Do you see that as the future of retail, or is it just a flash in the pan now? Will it be a side-by-side with the brick and mortar going forward? Do you foresee something on that?
I think the internet retailers that are opening stores will pick Class A properties to do that. Because they'll be looking for the largest trade area to support their store. And for a lot of stores to open in the Twin City area, I think is probably a Porsche. There's a Bonobos down in the North Loop. And there may be a couple others. The Mall of America may be able to attract some. I think the brick and mortar retailers being more adept at selling over the internet and using their store as a pickup or a return spot is a more promising avenue and can be done with almost any store. It's building the systems to do that, but the thought that you can deliver to an internet consumer something at the front door of your store that you've got on the shelf in your store is a win-win, because you get the sale and you got the customer coming to the store and he may decide to buy something else at the same time. And to get that going on a mall basis could drive business to malls.
Any idea what the cost of logistics is for a company like Amazon for delivery on a percentage of sales?
I don't know. They've got such buying power. And they're building their own logistics systems.
Right.
They've got their own aircraft now. They've got their own vehicles. I see the Amazon vehicles driving around my neighborhood. And Amazon is a unique company because it's three companies. It's Amazon, the internet retailer, it's Amazon, the site for other retailers, and it's a cloud computing business. They make an incredible amount of money on their cloud computing business, which they plow into their retail enterprises. And I sit and scratch my head because I think Amazon Prime is $10 a month, $120 a year. But anything you order, there's no delivery charge. So if you're the small retailer on Main Street that wants to do an internet business, you're probably paying $25 in shipping. And Amazon is offering free shipping. The way they're structuring that logistics business is going to be very challenging for a lot of retailers. The interesting thing is I read the annual reports for the retail stores. Some of them will tell you how much internet business they're doing. Some will not tell you how much internet business they're doing. And nobody will tell you whether they're making money at it.
One of the things you have not talked about is it would be very fascinating to take a look at case studies across the U.S. of regional shopping malls that have been successfully converted and what kind of products they're using to convert those. And certainly medical has been a big factor in many of the strip centers we've seen, and I think it's going to become I think it's going to become a major factor in the conversion of a lot of these regional shopping centers as well. I see the auto industry doing things differently and stepping up in some cases with two-story showrooms and so forth. Do you have any insight of that? Have you done any studies about some of the conversions that are occurring all across the United States right now?
No, I haven't seen any studies, that really address it. What you see is articles about somebody that did a church in a regional mall, sort of a one-time thing. And you see specific types of one-off type examples which don't lead to a rollout of a strategy. I think actually the book I've got from Seritage does have roughly 25 Sears stores that have been redeveloped, and they have identified the tenants that have attracted to these redevelopments. Some of it's putting tenants in the existing store. Some of it is tearing down part of the existing store and developing new street-facing or parking lot-facing retail stores, or doing entertainment, restaurant wings in the parking areas. So that's probably the best source of how large boxes can be redeveloped that I know, because they've probably had to, they clearly have more stores that can be redeveloped than any other retailer. I'm thinking of their store down at Ventura in Florida. They just took the store down and did all small shops in a strip center and Main Street type configuration. But that's a market with a lot of horsepower.
And better weather.
Well, it's got all of South America in its trade area.
Outside of the tenant mix, is there any amenities that these retail, especially the regional malls, need or have proven to be successful to draw people in?
I think off the top of my head, I can't think of any amenities, but amenities are important. And I guess the malls haven't been particularly creative at that. But I've seen properties that have done really spectacular jobs with children's play areas. Really unique and the sort of place that the kid would say, gee, I'd like to go there, Mom, when you go shopping, as opposed to feeling like they're being dumped off in some location. But in some markets, bringing light and air into the center, creating, I think there's a real opportunity to take the mall and make it a true pedestrian street, and give it more of a street feel rather than a corridor. And most of the malls, they've got very deep spaces in the tenant building, which retailers don't want today, so they can afford to give up some space at the front of the store because they can't lease the back of the store anyway. And you don't see a lot of people doing sidewalk cafes in malls. Southdale had one in the original court. And it went away with the renovation and the transition to Dayton's. So the key, one of the key things is finding a way to get the consumer to spend more time at your center. Giving them more things to do and more options, taking advantage of food as a draw, and to let the traffic in the mall become an entertainment factor for somebody that's sitting in a sidewalk cafe style restaurant. There's a lot of talk about entertainment, creating experiences, and I think that's a wide open field for a lot of creative thought for how stores can make their business more entertaining. And as I think about it, I was amazed when we started to see martini menus, because I'm a guy that, you know, there were 2 martinis, gin and vodka. But so then we've gone from the martini menu to more varied cocktail. The bartender has become a mixologist, and he's becoming an actor in a show. And part of that whole experience is watching him do the drink. That's entertainment. And that's a lot different than the guy plunking vermouth and gin in a glass and dropping an olive in it. So it's thinking about what the retailer is thinking about, how they can add experience to their offerings. Sephora, for example, now lets the customer try the cosmetics. Don't necessarily have to have one of their salespeople do the makeup thing that cosmetics counters all do. They let the customer experiment. That's all kind of entertaining. So I think that's a wide open field for a lot of creativity.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Combs, for your time.
Pardon?
Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. I've enjoyed this. And the one thing I'd like to add is a lot of these things you see playing out with millennials and retail are going to play out in your community as you grow and expand. And this isn't your business necessarily, but your community should think about how to make Burnsville more appealing to the millennials as they move forward. Because the pure dynamics of this business is that there are going to be so many millennials, they can't all live in downtown Minneapolis. They're going to have to live other places. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Updates, Mr. Nienhaus?
2 updates, Mr. Commissioner. As you all know, last month we held the Beckrec Road Rally. We had about 35 brokers that attended. We've gotten positive responses from both the brokers that were in attendance and the building owners. I have had one broker tell me that there is a possible deal that could come out of that road rally, so that's very positive. Thank you to Commissioners Coppenjohn and LaFever, who were all in attendance, and of course, Commissioner LaFever actually had a building on the tour, so thank you twice. The other update is that the special meeting that I alerted you all to on August 2nd is actually going to be canceled. The RFP deadline has come and gone, and we did not get any submittals on the RFP for the AAA land, so there will be no need to obviously hold that meeting. And we're going to take some other steps and try some other marketing options on the land. So hopefully sometime in the future, we will be bringing you a purchase contract to review. And that's the only updates I have, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you. With that, do we adjourn? Move
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.